You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio, Episode 6. I'm David Gornoski. Today I speak with Michael Gibson, co-founder of 1517 Fund, named in honor of Martin Luther's 95 Theses. The 1517 Fund looks for entrepreneurs ready to change the world without using college degrees to do it.
So if you look at the story structure of movies, and Campbell, or at least George Lucas's use of Campbell for Star Wars really brought this out. But, you know, a lot of people emulate it from then to now. Some people call it a 3-act structure in movies. However you divide it, usually about 8/10 of the way through a movie, you reach this point where the protagonist has a dark night of the soul, where whatever goal they've had throughout the story, they have now reached the lowest point at which it seems furthest away. They've been defeated in some important respect, hopefully both in the external world and in their inner life. And then the third act is a bit of a resurrection. So out of that dark night of the soul usually comes the resolve and the plan to figure out how to overcome the antagonist. And so that structure is very, you see it in the story of Christ, but it's interesting is like, what is the third act? It's like Americans love redemption. We love this idea of people being at their lowest point and then finding a way to secure victory or happiness or order or whatever. So I wonder if like that structure to storytelling is like what Girard is saying. I'm not an expert on this, but maybe what he's saying is like, you see this story about people who fail or are destroyed by their antagonists, and then they are resurrected in some respect. Now, in most stories today, of course, it's not death and life, but thematically it is. So it's like, you know, the death of some piece of someone leads to the resurrection as something more powerful.
Right. And the hero's structure, it comes a little bit later in the world of mythology, you know, Beowulf and these stories.
Right.
And so it's more of a sophisticated, I don't believe, and Girard I think is in the same vein on this point, in that it's not like with the Jesus story that's just this anomaly. There are stories of this dying and rising, you know, structure, this hero's myth being told throughout history. And at first you look at some of the oldest stories, the creation myths, and it's very esoteric, and the violence is almost cartoonish. You know, Marduk breaks wind, and therefore there's this part of the universe is created, and he stabs, you know, and it's all about, you know, popping open someone's. It's almost like Looney Tunes, you know, one god pops open the head of another god, and out came the humanity, and all these things.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a very good description.
Yeah, and what Girard says, you know, is that obfuscation is intentional on the part of the oral tradition, because it's a way of covering up for the fact that at the root of that is a ritual human sacrifice, and at the root of that ritual human sacrifice is a founding murder, a murder of an innocent victim, and not innocent in an objective, true sense, but innocent of the charges being levied against him by the community, that this individual or group is somehow the cause of all of our ills, and if we could just let's just kill this guy and throw them off the cliff, and we'll have peace. That is obfuscated in the mythology, where you see these cartoonish depictions of violence, where all these gods are battling over taboos.
So these are the things hidden since the foundation of the world.
So that's the early part. But then when you get into the hero stories, which are told later in mythology, it's more sophisticated and it's more complex, and now we have oftentimes a human protagonist, not just gods battling it up in the celestial world. Now we have a human, and there is that belly in the well experience. But Girard would say there's a correlation there, in the sense that in mythology, the the gods themselves are divinized victims, right?
Mm.
So
right. And he characterize kings as victims who have merely prolonged or prevented their sacrifice to date. Something like that.
Right.
I can't remember. It's like a definition of a king is someone who is yet to be sacrificed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the idea that's where the institution of kingship came from. Is the idea of delaying the sacrifice, because that's what would happen. You would divinize. A lot of times in these archaic societies, you would capture slaves and you would enculturate them into the local community. You would give them wine and feasting, and you'd give them access to orgies and all the delights that they wanted to get them. It's almost like you had to get some of the localness onto them before they could be representative sacrifice. If they were wholly other, it wouldn't be a vicarious atonement for the community's sins. You had to get a little bit of your localness into the sacrifice.
Yeah, right.
And then
so
that's
it's like
where
you're not in the center of the community, but neither are you totally outside of it. You're right on the periphery of being a member, but not so much a member that they can't exile you or kill you.
Exactly. Yeah, you had to have a little bit of one foot in the other world and one foot in the insider clique, because otherwise, if you were just an enemy other, it's hard for that to be an atonement for the local stress, right?
I think it's fascinating to me that a similar dynamic is at play, I think, in the concept of cool. So if you think of what's cool, I think a definition would be something along the lines of what we just said, where it's a fashion or a taste or some artistic production or whatever, where it's not so familiar that it's totally wholly within our culture, but neither is it so alien that it's totally indecipherable and incomprehensible.
Right.
It's something that's right on that liminal edge of permissibility and prohibition, something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is I think that fits that kind of push-pull dynamic there that makes something attractive, where it's kind of like, is this good or bad, and that kind of ambiguity makes us desire it more, right?
Yeah. Have you been following the Hypatia affair? Is that what it's called?
I don't know. Tell me what that's about.
So this philosophy professor, I can't remember what school she's at, but she published a paper in this journal, I believe is called Hypatia. I may be mispronouncing it, but it's a leading journal in feminist theory. And this professor published a paper arguing that if the argument boils down to this, is if transgenderism is morally permissible, then those same arguments can be used to support transracialism. That was it. Seems pretty uncontroversial to me in a academic paper.
Right.
But suddenly the left-wing feminists went apoplectic, and they attacked the journal, they attacked this professor, and so it was very much an episode of scapegoating. And the journal was forced to retract the article. The protests were so loud and vociferous from these strident left-wingers, and this professor has gone into hiding. She has not responded. She's fearful for her career. And a lot of the responses, it's interesting, is like the strident left-wing feminists were saying that the academic paper itself and its arguments constituted violence against their community.
Right.
And that's why their reaction was legitimate.
That's interesting, because that's something I wrote about in an essay a little while ago I call it the West's deadly speech pathology. It is the idea that we use with this postmodern world that we're in now, where we say language is violent, but actual violence is passé. Like, we don't care.
That's pretty absurd. You're right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like we bomb weddings in Pakistan.
Yeah. I mean,
no one cares.
It's worse that you say a racial differentiation than it is that you actually kill someone or torture or mutilate or mass, incarcerate or all these actual violent things,
Yeah. I mean, if you're James Watson, you're exiled and excommunicated quicker and harsher than you are if you're the former president who killed civilians with drone strikes.
Exactly. So that's an evidence of the idea that we're still in the process of myth making in our modern time. We're still hiding the bodies of our culture. We don't want to look and see the hidden victims. We don't want to see, when you vote for Hillary and all this stuff and you feel like you're empowering victims because the other guy was saying something bad about handicapped people. Meanwhile, Hillary will lead to and was openly calling for no-fly zones over Syria and all these other things, which would mutilate and handicap thousands of people. So you don't really care about handicapped people. You just care about them being differentiated as a handicapped person. There's an obsession with policing differentiation as the real violence, whereas violence is hidden, and that's the myth-making process.
That's very astute. Hiding violence and responsibility. I love there's this great play turned into a movie called The History Boys, and the story itself is good, but it's about these young men trying to get into Oxford and Cambridge their senior year of what's the British equivalent of high school, but they have this one teacher who's trying to get them to see World War I very differently, and he takes them out to these monuments, and there's this one line he has that I just love where he says, we build these monuments and we tell each other that it's lest we forget, but the truth is that there's nothing it's so easy to trivialize the violence of the past by making a monument to it and commemorating it. No quicker way to forget something than by commemorating it. It's not lest we forget, but lest we remember that we were responsible.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah. The idea of remembering, that's what Gerard says. He plays with that word, remembering, to remember the body back together, right?
That's good.
So culture,
good pun.
Culture is remembering the body, the original victim that we all poured our tension and our blame and our shame into. We remember it back together in a safe, controlled manner so as to hide and control, at least attempt to control the stresses in our community going forward. But it doesn't work anymore.
I think there's also this element, though, of our complicity in the violence. It's like we don't want to accept responsibility for voting a violent president into office, like Obama, Clinton, whoever, take your pick.
Right.
And so I think there are all these strange ways in which we will hide that complicity in the violence from ourselves. And maybe this is even on a small, and maybe to some extent, it's like we're all guilty of this in the way that we don't want to see the cattle that we eat slaughtered. The food that we consume is just so distant. It's prepared and so on, so distant from us, and by the time it reaches us, you wouldn't know where it came from.
Yeah, that's why Trump is so important right now, politically and culturally, because Trump he's not hiding the sausage of how the political theater is supposed to be. Right?
That's great. Yeah, you're right. It's almost like that's his worst crime.
Yeah, and
that he's not hiding it well.
Yeah, that's why the left hates him so much, because they're true believers. They're fundamentalist believers in the state, which is a religion, right? And they believe in the state, and they trust in the state, and they believe that the state is the redemption, the lifeblood of the people, and so the idea that someone says, I'm not doing this just because I'm not using the cool speech, I'm not playing the game. I'm here to tell you that I'm the winner, I'm the champion, I am the best, and that ruins. It's like turning on the lights during your favorite movie.
Yes.
Can you imagine going to a midnight premiere of Star Wars and someone turns on the lights right when Yoda pops out? You know,
You'd be pretty pissed.
They'd kill you, yeah.
And like you said, it doesn't even have to do with what you say when you turn the lights on. You're just pissed the lights are on.
Yeah, because it wakes you up from the fantasy, and that's what the state lives off of, keeping people in that fantasy that somehow if they kill someone, it's righteous and it's justified.
That's right. So it's sacrilegious versus sacred violence, right?
Yeah. So in some ways, Trump is doing more to delegitimize the state than even someone like a Ron Paul would have if he had become president.
I love it.
It's true because
there is an argument that in order to accelerate the anarchic tendencies,
you have to.
It's like Trump is a great catalyst by his bumbling nature.
Yeah, that's the way a revelation really works. It's this idea that the lights turn on in a very vulgar, barbaric, brutish way, and it's Trump's brutal, vulgar language and personality is revealing the hidden vulgarity of the state itself.
Yeah.
That's why they keep using words like he's ruining the sanctity of the presidency. And he's twittering. He's twittering,
not presidential.
Yeah. Tweeting. He's tweeting right now. That's not
right.
That's beneath the sanctity of the state, and that sanctity
is the
key word. Yeah.
Yeah, the story that broke yesterday is interesting to read in this way. Trump, it seems, it's hard to tell. The Washington Post broke the story, and there's a lot of passive voice in the article. So you never know. Someone in this meeting that Trump had with the Russian ambassador or diplomats revealed to the Post that Trump said something he shouldn't have to the Russians. Okay, right. That seems to have happened. But the response is that this is not just bad management, but that it's sacrilegious.
Right. Yeah.
That he revealed something he shouldn't have.
Yeah. And so it's so phony because they said there's like two people in there with him. And one of the guys is saying, nobody leaked anything. I was there.
That's right. Yeah. The head of the National Security Council saying...
Well, who leaked it then? Russia?
Yeah. Who did leak it? Yeah, some guy in the corner. I mean, who else was in the room?
Right. But that's an example every day. And that's why, like I said, Trump has been the best thing we've had for delegitimizing the state's sacredness, which is... By bumbling around. It's like a Chris Farley movie where he's tripping over the wires and stumbling.
Revolution by Buster Keaton.
Yeah, he's it's like a guy. There's a beautiful, elaborate theater stage set up, and he's
tripping on the wires.
Yeah.
His makeup is off. His hair, his toupee is terrible.
And he's mocking these veterans of the stage, like Hillary Clinton, saying these guys are a bunch of losers, and he's not using the right words, and he's bringing up these alleged rape victims of Bill Clinton onto he's just ruining it. He's ruining it.
Aristophanes comes to Washington.
Romney and McCain would never have done this. Rubio would have never done this.
Part well.
Yeah,
that's so good.
So
have you? I was there's this guy Cody Wilson in Texas. He's a cyberpunk, cyber anarchist. He's been working on 3D printing guns and has attracted a lot of attention and notoriety. But one of the things he said that I think is true is that he was in a Q&A session at South by Southwest, and this person in the audience said, "Don't you think what you're doing, spreading the information about how to print these guns, isn't that a breach of the social contract?" And his response was, "The social contract is a myth perpetuated by the state to romanticize its power."
Yeah.
So that sentence alone has stuck with me, where it's like, what does the state do to romanticize its power and create a mythology? And you're right, there's all this pomp and circumstance, protocol, ritual, designed to obfuscate and hide the actual terrible violence and savagery beneath the surface.
Right. I mean, what is the social contract itself? It's like this mythic story of people just sitting down and writing out an agreement.
It does not. It's like, okay, yeah, there are so many philosophical issues with the idea of the social contract that it just doesn't even make sense. It's like a bunch of people sat down and signed something 200 years ago and somehow were held accountable.
And that's as if everybody just did this peaceably with no skin in the game, no leverage, no we all know. I mean, if you go study the Constitutional Convention, it was a coup, right? They waited till Jefferson was in France, and the only guy they had, the best representative they had to fight for an anti-federalist position was a drunken guy named Luther Martin from Maryland, who was the most bumbling, rambling fool. He would speak for 4 hours at a time and you wouldn't understand what he said. And that was the best guy they had on site to represent the anti-federalist position when they were creating this Constitution. They banned the media. They banned the people from talking about, So there's even in our own Constitution that social contract, as if that was somehow this sanctified moment, was not. It was just another dirty little political muckety-muck situation with people fighting out special interests.
Right. The whole idea of consent in this country is just totally awash in myth and illusion. It's like in the Declaration of Independence, I happened to be reading a section of this last night, in the very beginning, the famous preamble, that governments are constituted by the consent of the governed. That's the line. And I was thinking, it's like, this government has never been constituted by the consent of the governed. That has never happened, not even in some hypothetical Rawlsian thought experiment sense. And in the fact that we parade around and speak these platitudes as if people have consented to things, it's mystifying to me, but also dangerous.
The gods never died. We still have the same gods. We still have Thor. We still have Marduk. They're just called the will of the people, the thin blue line, the majority will, the public good, the general welfare. Those are the names of the gods that we worship. They're just esoteric symbols that we spout out to justify doing absolutely disgusting things to our neighbors as a mass movement. I mean, the idea of putting your neighbor in a cage, right, for a non-violent behavior, no matter how greedy the neighbor was, no matter how foolish they were with, abusing drugs. The idea of putting someone in a cage where they can't defend themselves from actual assault, right?
Yeah.
They can't flee. And the idea that you put them in that cage by being on a jury and saying, guilty, put them in a cage, or voting for politicians that keep said laws in place. We don't want to face the fact of how ugly and brutish and pathetically archaic what we're doing is. The idea that okay, all right, your sin was you broke, for example,
you sold lots of drugs,
or you sold milk from a cow's udder. We'll put you in a cage,
That's so absurd. I know. I think when we look back in the past, TV shows like Mad Men are predicated on this, where you look in the past and you look at these mores and manners and behavioral patterns, and people are like, oh, how absurd was it that people smoked on planes or slapped their kids, or sexual harassment was open in the office and so on. I think in 100 years, I just hope it's the case, we look back to our current era at the prison system and just see how barbaric it was.
Right. But the prison system is the lifeblood of the states, right? I mean, as long as we assume that violence is okay if you're greedy, like if you don't pay enough tax or you violate a regulation, like the minimum wage law. I actually looked that up in the U.S. Code. It's actually, you can go to prison if you don't pay the minimum wage. And I thought,
wow, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
You take two individuals who meet each other and they both agree, two consenting adults. They agree to some situation, and the state is saying it'll throw one of them in jail if they make that agreement. Yeah.
And they'll take their money, and then they'll put them in cage. Or the idea of food laws. The idea that you have to have a certified health inspected kitchen, right? If you don't, I actually called. I live in Florida, and I called the Department of Health to ask them to verify this for me. And I said, is it the case that it's technically illegal and punishable by fines, and if you don't pay the fines, jail time, if a little old lady brings lasagna to the church dinner. She said, yes, technically that is a crime. That's illegal.
So absurd.
And she said, we just don't enforce it, though, because, because it wasn't, I said, so it's not even about whether there's a money transaction. It's the fact that you've cooked lasagna and you've presented it to the public for consumption.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in my role as a venture capitalist, I have to say, I think I hear this pitch maybe once every month or two. Someone will say, I want to create a Airbnb for kitchens or like Uber for domestic kitchens.
Right.
And it's like, so on your phone, you would open it up and then you'd get to order a meal from mom or grandma.
Right. Yeah, I've thought of that idea too.
Right.
Yeah.
And every time I have to tell them is like, no, I'm sorry, what you're proposing is just flat out illegal.
Right.
You can't be done. Just because the FDA and other regulatory agencies, the Health and Human Services or whatever, they think they don't trust you to or anyone to make safe food.
Right. Well, that whole regulatory thing, that is a vestige from the idea of trials and rights, right? Rites of passage, right? The idea that an entrepreneur who's trying to be a hero and he's trying to do something different or bold or avant-garde, try to create a new way of having a restaurant or whatever, but he doesn't have the money to go through. See, the bureaucratic process is the vestige of the ritual that you have to go through these rites of passage, the trial by fire, so to speak. Pay the bureaucratic priest, do the certain inspections, go through all the hassle, and get in debt to do it, and then we will permit you a sanctified kitchen so you can be with the rest of the market. See, that's the vestige.
That's great. I've never heard it construed that way. That's very smart.
Yeah. Well, that's what the state. That's why I think Girard is so important right now. The liberty movement and libertarianism is so irrelevant right now. And
it really is.
It needs Girard. It needs mimetic theory. It needs because mimetic theory is not a political statement, but it ultimately leads to the end of the state when you follow the conclusions. When Girard himself says that the state is the vestige of ritual human sacrifice.
Yeah.
So the state is a religion.
It's interesting, though. It's like Girard himself was very much against, I don't think he ever used the word libertarianism.
Right.
But in his book on Dostoevsky's work, I think it's called something about the underground. I can't remember the title. But in the end, Girard has a few paragraphs on what he sees as the weaknesses of individualism. Mm-hmm. Do you remember these?
I did not read that one, but it's one I want to read. Yeah, the Dostoevsky book. Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how Girard distances himself from Western individualism,
right?
And so maybe it's more, I don't know. It's like you have these theories about social dynamics. Maybe it's hard to see where exactly they lead to when it comes to political philosophy, but
right. But that's why it was interesting because, it's almost like the libertarianism on offer was not the right offering.
That's true too.
Yeah. I mean, we should throw out individualism. I think that's one of the reasons why libertarianism is irrelevant because it doesn't scratch the itch for the need for a tribe and a culture. Right.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I think maybe one of the issues is that you had people like Rand and the followers of Rand, they wanted to build up this myth of the heroic individual, which can be inspiring at times. But I think it's much better if we think in terms of groups, tribes, and communities than in terms of like single people.
And libertarians try to deny that, and that's the problem. The libertarians don't want to reconcile with a true anthropology. They want to believe that human beings are fundamentally walking brains on a stick, and that they're reason-oriented people. And so we just need to get them to think proper mental propositions, and therefore the state will not be a problem anymore. It's not going to happen. It's like that's what I tell people: to bring reason to a fight with people who believe in the state is like bringing a butter knife to a fight with the tribal cannibalistic war campaign. They're going to take that butter knife and eat you alive with it because Because reason is not what governs people's faith in the state. It's something that Girard taps into, which is desire, right? Mimetic desire. The desire to be one with your neighbor. And that desire to be one with your neighbor is what the state taps into. It's a deeply religious experience that people have when they say, I'm going to go ahead and vote for Hillary or Trump or all these people, because the lifeblood of the state is the religion that they are enraptured by. They don't realize it's a religion because the myth of modernity makes it look like that's somehow in some kind of a neutral space that's not religious. But it is, right?
Yeah,
our own modern myths hide us from the religious nature of what we're doing.
That's great. Right? That's the sentence everyone should have written.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know, somewhere in their home.
What I like about what you're doing is that, you guys, it seems like, are on the forefront of trying to move the culture in a positive direction. I always like to talk about the problems, but I also, more importantly, I'm trying to push myself to focus more and more of my time on the positive solutions, right? The positive solutions to the problems of the state and the decline that we have economically. And I think that's what you're doing, right? You're on the tip of the spear. Yeah.
I remembered the Girard book. It's called Resurrection from the Underground.
Okay, yeah.
And the one at the very end he has a bit where he's talking about how Dostoevsky was in part arguing against the utilitarians and even laissez-faire free market devotees. And here's a bit I'll just read. He says, Girard writes, the dramatic part of the Notes from the Underground shows us how enlightened self-interest, at the very moment when it should triumph, is likely to be replaced by its exact opposite, a most bizarre law of unenlightened self-enslavement, we might say, or obscurantist other interest. So that's kind of interesting to me. Is like when we're left to our own devices, it's almost like we'll be at our weakest and most susceptible to internalizing the tyranny of the master and thinking it's our own voice or something like that.
Right. That's what is a great movie, The Truman Show. Have you seen that?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, with Jim Carrey. And that movie kind of depicts what you just talked about there, with the idea that as long as Truman believes that he's his own individual, he doesn't realize the hooks that are in him. He doesn't realize that the relationships around him, he's not choosing them. They're scripted out for him. And
that's great.
It's only when he realizes that he was in a lie and he gets out of that fake cocoon of individualism that he truly becomes a human, right? That's what true man, the idea. And that's where you have
clever.
Yeah, the bad guy in there, the God figure who runs this fake world that Truman exists in. He scripts out all of his relationships for him. His name is Christoph or Christoph. Antichrist. So it's this. That's that old story that Girard's telling, I think, and what Dostoevsky was touching on, which is the what Girard calls the romantic lie of the self. As long as you believe you're the captain of what's going on around you, you're totally enraptured and controlled.
Yeah, and so I think libertarians are just weakened by that philosophy as a group. Anecdotally, sometimes it'll come down to, and libertarians are just too ornery and prickly and so on. But really, philosophically, I think White does have a hard time appealing to Christians, evangelicals, and then maybe even women, is because it's not enough of a philosophy about the family or about the community or about something larger than ourselves, when it should be.
Yeah,
when it comes down to it, the core axiom of non-aggression is a very Christian idea.
Sure.
And so these two, theological and philosophical modes of thought should align really well, and it's, I think, really sad that they haven't.
Yeah, and then that's just a product of, this, again, the modern myth-making seeping into our understanding of what it means to be Christian and what it means to have a political identity. And so it's like, I don't want to put people in cages for drugs, so that means I got to buy into this individualism obsession, this rugged individualism. I mean, it's like, why do I have to buy that package deal? Why can't we actually be honest and resist the state, but do it in a way which actually honors the true anthropology of who we are, that understands that we are created by interindividual forces shaping.
Yeah.
We imitate those around us, and that's what shapes us. And this idea that we can reject the state without being. See, that's the problem with a lot of libertarianism. Is that, like, if you ever get around like some of the local libertarian party stuff, I watched it because I had some friends in it, and those guys were fighting like cats and dogs just to see who was going to be the treasury for a local little branch. They had 10 members. And I said, you guys are trying to kill each other over a treasury with a budget of $10, right?
Yeah.
And you're not in office, and you guys are trying to kill each other. You have no political power. What happens when you actually get somebody elected? What are you going to do then?
Yeah.
That's that whole concept.
To go back to what you were leading up to, though, it is important, I think, that we all start thinking about positive things we can do. I mean, we can all critique and complain. But eventually I think we all do need to take action in some part. And so, in the things we do with our fund, where, I mean, I worked for Peter Thiel for, 5 years and we did a lot of work on higher education. And so if you take a single issue like that, where you have these incredible torrents of social herd behavior, where this one monolithic path to success seems to exist. Everyone must go to college. Right. And then you try to alter that in some way. You try to show that there might be some alternative way to live a fulfilling life. And it was incredible. I mean, just how resistant people are to that. And it's still a problem, but nevertheless, we're still trying to work on it in some way or another.
And that really is still connected to what you're doing now, right? With the 1517 fund, right?
Well, right. So the Thiel Fellowship was a nonprofit. That program still exists. It's a $100,000 grant to about 20 people a year. My co-founder and I, Danielle Strackman, we spun out to start a venture capital fund where we are extending the mission of the fellowship in the sense that we can scale as a fund. We're for-profit, not non-profit. We make investments, but the goal is still the same. We're supporting and validating people outside the system. So dropouts, stopouts, people who've never been to school. We target our investments towards younger entrepreneurs who are just outside the swim and want to work on something. And the hope is that, I mean, of course, we have to make financial returns for our investors, but the goal is also, to provide role models for other people, to create public examples of people who have found these extraordinary careers without the authentication of this central, or this I don't know what to call it, but just this extremely powerful element in our society, the college system.
Yeah, so you're looking for young heroes then. You're on the quest.
Yeah, very much so. My brother calls me Professor X because I'm constantly flying around the country looking for mutants.
You get a call. I hear there's this kid. He's got a talent. He can do this magical power. I mean, I'll be there.
That's pretty much it. That's how it happens. I get an email.
Pretty cool.
I fly all over the country. I meet people in strange places. Do
you have an age limit to the kids you'll go after? Is it like a certain age? Like 18 to 24?
We look for 18 to 24, something along those lines.
The college age.
But we're not constrained. So we have made investments in older people. Hopefully, though, that they fit that mold, though, of, okay, they're older, but they never went to school, or they dropped out, or they fill some other piece of the story.
Let me ask you this. How come in Silicon Valley you don't hear about those Obi-Wan types, like the mad professor in the wilderness who's got this? It's always the young guys. How come you don't see any, startups by these Yoda figures in the wilderness? Do you see any of that? I mean, maybe there is.
I mean, if you look at there is a youth obsession in Silicon Valley, where, especially on consumer products. If you look at the numbers, though, it looks like most companies are started by, I think it's people between the age of 28 and early 30s.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the mentors are out there. I guess the social network story. If you look at the Zuckerberg story, maybe Peter Thiel plays the mentor role in that one. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. Not sure.
I know Thiel has said before that our liberal market order works so long as we're growing, right? If we are stagnant, that's when scapegoats start happening, right? That's when we start looking for blame.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if Peter came up with the argument independently, but I remember there was a book published in the mid-2000s by this Harvard economist, Benjamin Friedman, called The Moral Consequences of Economic Growth. And it's a bit long-winded, but he did a pretty good historical analysis showing that at times when prolonged periods when the pie didn't grow, that's when intolerance increases, xenophobia, and scapegoating. Right. And so, yeah, Peter has very much been talking about that, and I think that's why, if you look at Trump and then you see it's an international phenomenon, you see it in England, France, Germany, other places. A lot of this discord has to be a common source, and so that's why I look to the lack of economic growth and just the total stagnation.
And you see that on the left too, where everybody's fighting over who's got the most privilege because there's not enough pie, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you've got two pieces of pie. That's basically what they're saying when they say you're a cisgendered blah 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 blah. You've got two pieces of pie, and I want I want a little more.
That's a great observation. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the news stories, it's always about, the stagnation is the white, redneck, blue-collar male, but it's actually everybody's feeling the pressure, right? Because everybody's blaming everybody, right? Everybody, I mean, in the middle class and below, I guess. But you're saying, that's what I wanted to kind of get at is that you see, is it fair to say that you're motivated by a moral imperative with your project to try to make the world better?
Yeah, very much so. I have a deep, abiding concern with the destiny of man, and I take the long view. I look up to the stars and I think about things like the Fermi paradox, and which basically really focuses in on just how precious life is on this planet, and especially what I would just flat out say the higher forms of life, conscious beings. And so I'm motivated by trying, not just being a custodian, but also, hopefully extending that destiny in some fashion. So, I don't know what the far future is, but there will be dangers that we can't even fathom. And I don't want life on this planet to be wiped out. And so if you take that long sort of, and maybe it's grandiose and maybe it's mythological or whatever, but that's where my faith resides. And so in the things I try to do, I hope I can sort of piece it together towards that larger arc of human destiny, where I don't think we can't go back to the cave. We can't go back to the pastoral, Rousseau noble savagery. That just isn't an option. And so I think if we are going to survive and thrive as a species, we need to advance in along all categories. And so to the extent that I'm funding new companies that are doing new things and making the standards of living better or easing someone's pain, I think we're part of that mission. But then even in the longer view, as I hope I can contribute personally to just making sure that like whatever purpose our civilization has, I hope it's one that continues.
And that really goes to the heart of what I think it means to the real desire behind a good company, which is to service a need, right? Not profit is a side effect of servicing that need very well. It's not
we don't. When we evaluate teams pitching us, I mean, one of the things that we really that we're trying to figure out is motivation. And the people who are motivated just to make profit are the ones who fail most often. It's like the people. There's this historian, Paul Johnson, I think his name is. Misremembering. but he wrote a history of America, and he was talking once about it, and he pointed out that if you look at the colonization of America, the New World, there were people who built colonies for profit. Sir Walter Raleigh or others, where they formed these companies to maybe bring back harvests or other, precious things. And then you contrast those communities with the ones founded by religious sects, people looking for asylum or sanctuary, people who came to worship God. And so who made it through the winter when you compare these two communities? Like, which ones thrived? And it's like the ones who came to the New World just for profit, right. They didn't last. The ones who came for God, they're the ones who survived the winter. And so I think it's the same actually with starting companies, where if you're not motivated, because the obstacles are immense, we've mentioned a few of them, state-created obstacles, but then there's just also the challenge of starting something new and creating. And it's such a hard road that, one, it can't be done alone, and two, you better be motivated by something more than money, because if you are motivated just by money, you won't have it in you to make it through.
Right, because money is ultimately, if profit is your main priority, that's a mimetic priority. You're desiring to keep up with the Joneses ultimately, because profit as an end unto itself is kind of just by what standard have you made it to the profitable goal, right? So is it when you have X amount more than the guy you saw that you thought was profitable, or at what point do you say enough? And that's why it's got to be something which is transcendent, I believe, that motivates you. Otherwise, in my own business,
I think that's right. Yeah, go for it.
I was just saying, in my own business, I've always felt kind of like whenever I've tried something new, that sometimes you feel like Noah building the ark, and people are saying, "What are you doing?"
That's good.
We haven't had rain. Why do you need to build a giant boat? That doesn't make any sense, And
right.
That's actually more of the trial than the regulatory trials, that the government puts up. Is that own, is this?
Yeah.
I see something around the corner.
I hadn't thought about Noah as the first entrepreneur, but that's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I see something around the corner. I don't know if it's real yet, but it's like reaching out into the darkness, and you feel something, and everybody's looking at you saying, "Why are you feeling out in the darkness? You look like a madman."
Well, and actually, the Noah myth is something that basically I just told you about what motivates me. Except the ark to me is just the planet Earth, or whatever protects humanity from destroying itself. And so, I think we all should be ark builders. We don't see the dangers, and yet I think we have to be aware of them.
Do you have one or two, like ideal technologies that you'd like to see shepherd in your lifetime that would actually, give you that feeling that we are building a good ark, so to speak, that would help mankind? Anything that little pet, some people want to go to the stars, and some people want great energy.
I will start with transportation. I think if we had faster, safer modes of transport, it'd feel like we were progressing as a society. I know I would. My mom lives in Texas, and I wish I got to see her more often. I live in California. I think it'd be incredible if I could pop over to her house on a Sunday night in an hour and come back here for work. Something incredible like that. I read a memoir of Michael Collins. He was the third astronaut on the Apollo mission with Buzz Aldrin and then Neil Armstrong. And it was just, it suddenly made fresh just what an exciting adventure the trip to the moon was to me. And it boggled my mind. And I look up at the moon now, and I have a renewed sense of awe that, holy shit, there have been men on that. And so I'd love to see that in my lifetime again. I don't know, and I think I think those types of things would create a spirit of adventure. And I don't know if it'd bring more peace to the land. I think obviously social dynamics are much more complicated than that, but I'd love to see advances in transportation. I'd love to see the power of the state wither. I don't know what technologies will.
I think it would have to be something like abundant access to, Earth materials and
Yeah.
energy would have to be, you know what I mean, to a point where...
So, right. I mean, advances in energy are huge. I think if we did have energy too abundant to meter, I think that was the phrase back, the promise of nuclear energy. Fusion is always far away. There are some people working on it, but I think it's still a pipe dream based on some cursory research I've done. But I think you're right. I think the more limited our resources appear, the more, and to go back to the economic stagnation argument, is, the more intolerant people will be, or the more, just fearful they are of what other people are doing and have.
Well,
so
scarcity is what breeds that death anxiety that bothers nations into fighting over oil and access to pipelines and all that stuff, that scarcity. So that's those are tangible.
One of the original sacrifices on the energy story is just I want to write something on this, but I haven't felt through the moral implications of the story. But maybe it's Girardian in the sense in that if you think about the history of the universe up until 1950 or so, there was only, as far as we know, is like there's only one way for stars to come about. And stars form in very long processes, very violent, and that was it. It's like in the cosmos, these stars form every so often when matter accumulates, and helium and the density forces these things to a fusion process, right? And so that's as far as it went up until 1950. And then I was reading this memoir by a mathematician, Stanislaw Ulam, who was drafted by von Neumann into the Manhattan Project. And he, after World War II, he and Edward Teller were thinking about create a hydrogen bomb and how it might be possible to ignite an even more powerful nuclear explosion if the ignition was a fusion reaction. And they didn't know if this was possible. And in his memoir at the very end, I think he passed away or something, so his wife ended up she wrote this last section where there was this moment in the development of the hydrogen bomb where they didn't know how to create a fusion reaction. And so Ulam's wife comes home one day and she just like walks in and like putting the groceries down or something. And she recalls that Ulam is staring out the window, and he turns to her and he says something like, "I know how it can be done." And so he was like cogitating in his mind all the mathematical formulas for what needed to be done in order to create essentially a star. And so for me, that is this miraculous moment in the history of the universe where up until that point, the only way for a star to come about in the universe was through this natural process. And now all of a sudden, in the mind of a man staring out of his kitchen window to the garden, this mind had conceived of a way to ignite a star. And he did it. And then the violence is that it's part of this program to create a catastrophic weapon. But on the other hand, it's the seed of potential abundance in the future. So it's like any work on fusion begins with that story.